So the Pharisees make another appearance in the gospel, and you can always bet that when they appear, Jesus is about to tell us what they're doing wrong. And he doesn't fail us tonight. The Pharisees are interesting characters, and they were known for their almost fanatical adherence to the law. And in the Gospels, when we hear about them, it's usually because of some confrontation between Jesus and the meaning of the law. For all Jews, the law was central to their faith and really central to their entire lives. You see, they believed that God gave the law as a gift, as part of the covenant. In that covenant, God agreed to guide and protect them, and in return, they agreed to obey the law and follow their one true God. Parts of this law are still integral to our Christian tradition. 10 Commandments is an example of that. But for Jews, the law went well beyond the 10 Commandments, and it controlled all aspects of their lives: how they ate, how they worshiped, and even how they interacted with one another. They even developed a word for it, Torah, which means law or teachings in Hebrew. The law was meant to keep the Jewish people on the straight and narrow path, and it was also a reminder of God's love for them. For the Pharisees, though, it was different. For them, piety was measured simply by how closely a person followed the letter of the law. They used it as a way to show their superiority, dividing people into us, the holy ones, and them, the sinners. And Jesus really takes offense to that in the reading today. The way Jesus approaches this in the gospel is interesting. He doesn't attack the law at all. In fact, we read today from the short form, but in the longer form, it starts out by Jesus saying, "Do not think I've come to abolish the law." His concern is about how the Pharisees have twisted the law for their benefit, and in turn, pushing away the people most in need of God's grace. Jesus uses a pretty interesting technique, I think, to call out the Pharisees. He begins all of the statements by saying, "They say," and then he finishes with a "but I say," contrasting his interpretation of the law with that of the Pharisees. The law says, "Do not kill," but I say, "Do not even be angry at your brother." You see what he's doing? He's saying that we can't just take this law literally. Words and actions can kill just as surely as a knife can. What good is the law if the best we can say at the end of the day is, "Well, at least I didn't kill anybody"? Jesus continues with more examples. The law says you shall not commit adultery. But Jesus says, even looking at a woman with lust in your heart is just as bad, because it's a lack of respect for the person. And he goes on. What's Jesus trying to say to the Hebrew people of the time? Well, basically, he's calling them out because they've forgotten the real meaning of the Torah, that the law is meant to be a sign of love. And with this dialogue, Jesus is starting to establish the roots of his new covenant, the one that goes beyond the law. The law says, "But I say," these are the seeds of the new covenant. Jesus demands more. He's pulling the Hebrew people into a deeper relationship, one that goes beyond simple obedience. It's a relationship based on total love and opening oneself completely up to God. So we need to also ask ourselves, was this message intended for these Hebrew people, or does it somehow also apply to us? Personally, I don't think we're much different than they were back then, and I don't want to be presumptuous, but I think that there's a little bit of a Pharisee in each of us. I know that it's definitely true with me sometimes. Back in the day, the big sins were things like murder and adultery and lying. These were the things that the Pharisees talked about. Today it seems that we have a slightly different list that preoccupies us. We talk about the dignity of human life. We talk about homosexuality, divorce and remarriage, and things like this. And as I prepared for this homily and prayed about it, I tried my best to not get pulled in. But it was a humbling exercise as I considered how I respond to the law. How am I a Pharisee? A couple of things that I considered. It's easy for me to stand here and condemn the sin of abortion. But do I acknowledge that behind that act there remains a woman who is hurting, who deserves to still be treated as one of God's beloved children? How do I, as a man and as a deacon, work to heal that wound and show her that she is still loved? How do I go beyond the letter of the law? That it's easy for me to condemn homosexuality, but do I reach out to gay men and women to share the love that Jesus has given to me in abundance? Do I welcome them here to share Mass with us? Do I break bread with them? And do I stand up for their dignity? That sometimes it's all too easy for me to say that communion has to be refused to people who are remarried without an annulment. Yet what am I doing to heal the wounds of a failed marriage and a broken family? How am I ministering to that husband or wife who has to sit in the pew while we come forward for communion to receive God's grace? As I prayed this week, it became obvious to me that those three little words uttered by Jesus make all the difference. But I say as a challenge to us to live beyond the law. And if we're simply following the letter of the law, we're missing the point. Paul said it best in Romans. Love is the fulfillment of the law. Are we simply like the Pharisees who viewed the law as a tool to sort out sinners from saints? Or do we accept the invitation from Jesus to live beyond the law, seeking a more perfect love with our God and all of his children? Do we use the law to unite or divide? But I say is a path to redemption. It acknowledges that Jesus' sacrifice on the cross changed everything, and that it's no longer for us as Christians to simply say, but the law says. If the cross means anything, then we need to live the second part of that sentence. But I say, love God with all our hearts and love one another as we have been loved. It's a radical new perspective. And quite frankly, it's a little scary, but it's what we're called to be as Christians. This week, I ask that we all spend some time with God in prayer, asking, how am I being called to live the "but I say" in my life? I think we might surprise ourselves at how those three words can change us and lead us closer to one another and to Christ.